This beautiful little animal is Doty, my leopard gecko. This is where a lot of people imagine leopard geckos are from in the wild. This is actually the sort of habitat that they call home. Unfortunately, this is how a lot of people on the internet will tell you how to keep your gecko. But this is what I have created for Doty. And not only am I going to show you how, but I'm also going to explain why. And this is Aya. She has nothing to do with this video. I just thought you might like to see her. Welcome then, my friends. So, first things first, because I wanted this background to be removable, I had to start by cutting a piece of 9mm plyboard to size and doing a test fit to make sure I was already on the right tracks. I've done things by eye in the past without test fitting, and usually it ends up like this. Not really something I wanted to have to deal with again. So, once the board was cut, it was time to silicone on the 25mm polystyrene. Cut it to size, and this was to be my blank canvas to try and create both a piece of art and a slice of nature, which, to be fair, usually go hand in hand anyway. I did a rough drawing and guideline of the layers and hides that I wanted, and then began by carving away the top layer to add some depth. This was truly one of my favourite ever builds, because it taught me what you can accomplish with a little bit of guidance, patience, and recognising when you're not happy with something and putting it right instead of saying, that will do, which I am very guilty of. Before we continue, a big shout out to Damien from Copperhead Customs for being both my mentor and collaborator on this project. Without him, there's no way this would have been such a successful build. And if you aren't already subscribed to his channel, please consider doing so in order to see some of the absolute masterpieces that he has created, like this one and this one. Once the initial carving was complete, it was time to trial the first new method that Damien had introduced me to, which was getting the grout to a putty-like consistency instead of a paint, so I could mould it onto the background. I fell in love with this method immediately, as it felt like I already had more control of the sculpting and the build. Once the grout had been applied, but before it dried, I dabbed it with a wet sponge to create the realism of the smooth rock face and to add some texture. I then added a different texture on top of this by using a paintbrush. This would not only create more surface texture that was visually appealing, but would help further along the build when it came to applying the paint. So, remember early on in the video where I said that this build taught me about recognising when you're not happy with something and putting it right instead of saying, that will do? Well, that came down to this part here. I tried carving what I thought to be a rock structure from my imagination alone, but already midway through I wasn't happy. But I continued. I let it dry, added the next foam layers, and was thinking maybe I should just leave it as it was already dried. But then, why? Why would or should I leave it like this, knowing I'm not happy? Mediocre efforts create mediocre results, and so once reconvening with Damien and asking his advice, he sent me some photos and videos to help inspire my vision, guides to follow, and I'm so glad that he did, because I realised I had to change it. And so, using the putty grout method again, not only did I cover the new foam layer, but I completely covered the initial grout layer again, ready to recarve. Once again, waiting for the grout to dry out slightly, it was time to carve. And this time I was able to do that whilst tying in the new foam layer, really bringing it all in together. I thought about where these cracks might form. What direction would they go in? Where are the strengths and the weaknesses in this rock face? One of them, of course, was this deep crevice that came out to the front. I followed it back to the surface and extended what would be a big crack in the rock face. But then, why was I adding these cracks and crevices that she could actually climb on? Well, leopard geckos are highly thought of as a purely terrestrial species, meaning they only live on the ground and don't climb. Whilst they may not be as prolific at climbing as the likes of their crested counterparts, leopard geckos can and have been found climbing in and amongst rocky ledges and crevices, even tree stumps and logs. But be mindful when creating climbing opportunities for leopard geckos. A fall from height can be detrimental to the animal, so whilst we should offer them the opportunity, we should do so safely. The slow layering of expanding foam, carving the foam, grouting, smoothing and texturing, and designing the rock face, cracks and crevices continued on for a few more days. You can see this part here is now nicely blended in. Now, why didn't I do this bit? Well, you can probably tell by now that's because it's not finished. So I'm sort of making this up as I go along, to be completely honest with you. As you can see here, there is actually a hole up top that goes into this level here. Also, like that's going to be covered anyway, so I'm trying to do that because this is what I'm going to sort of foam over. That's going to be a cave that you know, that's got top access and bottom access. This is going to be another cool hide. And again, the entrance is sort of going to be here, but she can go either up there or down there, and then through there she can come up and around. I'm not sure whether I want to leave this as an open ledge or put maybe cover that as well. I'm not sure. This is going to come out quite far in a minute, and then obviously this is the warm hide with also a little basking ledge up here. So with the final idea in mind, it was time for, hopefully, the last layer of foam, which needed then to be carved, which then, of course, as you know by now, then needed grouting. And finally, this is what I ended up with. And to be honest, we hadn't even scratched the surface of this build yet, so to speak. It was very soon time to paint. And if you've seen any of my previous builds, I think you will agree with me when I say this is another weakness of mine. I am not artistically gifted, and so it was back to my Australian Viking mentor to ask for guidance. Damien once again explained my options, sent me some photos and videos as guidance, and left me on my way to see what I could do, implementing these things that he told me. I really wanted my base layer to be dark, so I added black acrylic into my spray bottle with water, gave it a good old shake, and started spraying. Immediately, the black water followed the carved lines and filled the sponge-textured rock face, and I was blown away. Damien did warn me that once it started drying, it wouldn't look like anything had been done, and that it would need a generous amount of layers. But to be honest with you, even after the first layer, I could genuinely see the potential. Once the initial layers were complete, similar to the grout, it was time for layer after layer after layer after layer of different color combinations of watered down acrylic paint. I did use different concentrations each time, depending on how prominent I wanted each color layer to be. Granted, by the end, you could barely see some of the colors I had sprayed on there, but there were hints in some of the cracks and crevices. And obviously, I didn't want it to be too multicolored. I just wanted that sort of naturalistic looking, very sporadic color rock face. And I think it turned out okay. The last two layers, I decided to spray on each half of the build to give it a bit of a natural gradient and more of a natural look, so it wasn't too uniform. At the end of the day, I'm trying to recreate nature, which is what I would call perfectly imperfect. I did a couple more very watered down black layers so that could sink and slide into the cracks, which gave them more depth, added some shadow, and this was the final outcome of all of the painting. And at this point alone, I was so incredibly proud of how it was looking. So there we go. I sent this photo of the background to Damien, and I asked him if he thought it was ready for the next stage. To which he sent me this photo here, and explained to me that the tufts of grass coming out of the rock would really set it off. This was achieved by taking clumps of grass, cable tying them together very tight at the bottom, drilling a small hole in the background, and pushing the cable-tied tufts into the holes. Not only does this have a very appealing effect on the build itself, but it will be easy to remove and replace if needs be. Once all of the grass was in place, it was time to pull the trigger and finally complete this build after a good few weeks worth of work. It had felt like a long one, but one that I had really enjoyed from start to nearly finish. One final look at how this enclosure is set up. The last one. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This has been one of my favourite setups. It's functional, it works. I've got the naturalistic looking side of things in here. Oh, right, let's go. So just a very quick one. I've done two 45-degree angles, which are going to sit up top in here so that the LED can point downwards. And as I've already mentioned, potentially the LED in question is a Luminize Jungle Dawn 18 watt. Obviously going alongside that, which I've already unboxed, is my Luminize Pro T5 Shade Dweller. This is going to be incredible. Cleaned, sterilized, blank canvas. And at this point, it was time to get the background in, make sure it fit, put the LED and UVB in, and then it was time. As you can see, on top of the tufts of grass that I had added, I'd also drilled some holes and fit some roots into the rockwork, which in my opinion really set it off. And now, with all of the heat and lighting installed, the background was seriously popping. The next thing on the list was the substrate. This substrate was a mix of topsoil, play sand, mulch leaf litter, and I also added some natural worm castings to hopefully help with the plant growth. This is the first time I've used worm castings, so I'll keep you up to date with how it all goes. I'm hoping with the combination of LED lighting and natural reptile safe fertilizer, the plants will do really well in here. On the topic of plants, where most people go for succulents and desert plants, I opted for more shrubs and herbs, once again keeping on the mindset of this not being an arid setup. I used a small rosemary bush and dotted bits of creeping thyme and oregano around the bigger roots that I had put in the enclosure. I added some stones near the basking spot, a small cork hide and some pine cones, before finishing off the setup using some soft pine needles. And then this was it. It was time. It was time for Doty to be introduced into her new planted bioactive enclosure. And whilst we enjoy some footage of Doty enjoying her new enclosure, let's talk about why I've opted for overhead heat, UVB, LED and loose substrate for a leopard gecko. Leopard geckos are crepuscular, not nocturnal like a lot of people will tell you. This means that they are at their most active at dawn and dusk. Granted, when there is less light, but that doesn't mean none at all. And even with that being said, they still don't live in areas of complete darkness. So why wouldn't we offer them the option to have access to overhead heating and UVB? While some leopard geckos may not be seen utilising it directly, a lot of the time, if given the chance, you will see what's known as cryptic basking, which is a behaviour exhibited by leopard geckos where they only expose a small part of their body, usually the head, tail or back, to the heat and UVB light source in their enclosure. This differs from full basking where the leopard gecko lays out flat with most of its body exposed. So it is my opinion and many other responsible reptile keepers that we should always offer overhead heating and UVB. We still live in a world where age-old myths are being used as fact, and a lot of people on the internet go around incorrectly correcting people when it comes to leopard gecko care and setups. For example, they are nocturnal, so don't need any UV or light, and they don't use overhead heating and just need a heat mat for belly heat. We need to start stamping these dangerous myths out once and for all. There are still people that opt for non-natural flooring or substrates, like flooring tiles, which don't provide enough grip and can cause the animals issues with balance and their joints, or reptile carpet, which we know is hard to clean, can harbour deadly bacteria and even catch and rip out their claws. They do this because of the misinformation surrounding impaction. Impaction is when constipation is caused by a blockage in the digestive tract. Substrate impaction occurs when the impaction is perceived to be caused by ingested substrate particles that are blocking the digestive tract. So why do a lot of people like myself still recommend loose substrate? The substrate itself is not the root cause. Impaction is caused by improper husbandry, like incorrect humidity, heating, or UV exposure. As we've discussed briefly, leopard geckos aren't an arid species. They're found in the shrublands of places like Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and even as far as India. Places that are of course hot and sunny, but not strangers to heavy downpours of rain and bouts of high humidity. A leopard gecko's enclosure should be kept at between 30 to 40% humidity range at all times, and you can recreate rainy days occasionally with a heavy misting, which will benefit the animal, cleanup crew, and live plants. Just make sure to do so whilst there are a few hours left of heat so that they aren't left wet when the temperature drops in the enclosure. Now, of course, no bioactive setup is anywhere near bioactive without the cleanup crew. So in went some of my giant orange isopods, eventually. And of course, something I didn't film was the springtails going in as well. Now, firstly, take into account the fact that I've already started tidying up. I'm actually showing you this midway through the tidy up, so you're just gonna have to dread to imagine what it was like about 10 minutes ago. I don't like this bit. Oh, anyway. Before we get to the outro, let's just quickly look at the crepuscular side of this enclosure. As you can see, with the luminize, dusk and dawn is being replicated because the UVB and LED is slowly ramping up and down, which truly gives this leopard gecko dusk and dawn recreation rather than being blasted with full midday heat, light and UV all day, every day. And that, my friends, is that the single best build I have done in my entire life. No two ways about it. It's not even close. Okay, I'm incredibly proud of it. She's enjoying it. She's only going to start enjoying it more the more comfortable she gets. We've tried to bust some myths. I mean, feel free to argue. If you really feel like you need to argue and disagree with those points, feel free. Obviously, respectfully, I'm not saying call me a something, but let's open the discussion. Okay, let's talk about it. But what I've said in this video is not me trying to be controversial and say anything bad, or these are just the facts and we're trying to bust some myths here, okay? But let me know what you think of the build, and like I say, there are more to come. The next one I've decided is going to be Doty, the blue tongue skink, and the ideas I've got for that one are going to be pretty incredible, to be honest with you. We're going to level up every single time. But apart from that, ladies and gents, massive shout out to my patrons. Again, this wouldn't be possible without you guys. If you want to help me that little bit more, get these projects done quicker, more content, more builds, better houses for my animals, the link will be in the description. Please consider joining. 7-day free trial, all of that. Everyone else, lots of love. Love you lots. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, all of the good stuff. And we'll see you in the next one. Peace out.